Phablets, they're the perennial behemoths in the space. Just when we all thought they couldn't get any bigger, companies continue to push the envelope, trimming wherever they can find to bring us even larger sized smartphones that we can try to fit in our pockets. One of them in particular, the Google Nexus 6, surely doesn't try to hide the fact that it's a gigantic phone in space. But it's a monumental phone that's ripe with drool-worthy specs, and it comes with the rich power of vanilla Android. Just as mentioned smaller, the LG G4 is a formidable rival with all the improvements that accompany any successive phone. So, is LG better at making Android phones? Hey guys, John V from PhoneArena here, and you're watching our video comparison between the LG G4 and the Google Nexus 6. First and foremost, there's the matter regarding their sizes, which is arguably the most apparent thing about their designs over everything else. Certainly, the Nexus 6 is a handful of a phone to handle. It's just obnoxiously big, making the G4 look minuscule next to it. Aesthetically, there's more of that sturdy feel with the Nexus 6, thanks in part to its metal trim bezel and sturdier polycarbonate casing. Plus, it's a closed design, whereas LG favors a sophisticated look with the G4's design thanks to a new leather backing option. Ultimately though, it purely comes down to personal preference. Now for something occupying a whole lot of real estate, the only unique thing crammed into the Nexus 6 is its dual front-firing speakers. Beyond that, there's very little to get excited about. Although it's not particularly the most features-rich smartphone we've encountered, the G4 bears a fair amount of goodies that include an IR blaster, removable battery, and a micro SD card slot. Big versus bigger, that's the essence of these two displays. Now for the G4, it continues the company's tradition of being forward-moving with its new 5.5-inch 1440 by 2560 IPS quantum display. As for the Google Nexus 6, it's still certainly a head-turner as well thanks to its larger 6-inch 1440 by 2560 AMOLED display it's been graced with on its facade. In all seriousness though, it's impossible to tell the difference from normal viewing distances which one is more detailed. Having Quad HD screens is where their similarities end, unfortunately, seeing that the G4's shiny new display exhibits more of the favorable qualities, like its stronger brightness output of 454 nits versus the weak 270 nit luminance of the Nexus 6, which in turn makes it far less readable under bright conditions outdoors. Secondly, the G4 is better at accurately reproducing colors at various gradients in the sRGB color chart, though it's still pretty saturated in tone considering it's an IPS-based panel. Of course, LG's decision to provide overblown colors with the G4's display is a purposeful one, allowing it to exhibit the vibrancy and rich colors necessary to command attention. All told, we favor the G4's display with this comparison, as it not only proves more effective to use in various situations, but also bears the attractive characteristics that's needed to capture our attention. We have stock Android versus LG's interpretation. Now, hardcore enthusiasts will no doubt vouch for the Nexus 6's stock Android 5.0 lollipop experience for its straightforward, no-hassles approach. You have the rich software features and the modern styling thanks to material design. While going with Nexus 6 has its perks, like being glued to the latest and greatest Android updates faster than most handsets, it doesn't have the army of features attached to the LG User Experience 4.0 of the G4. And that's the biggest differentiator between them, seeing that some people will appreciate the extra features in tow with the G4's experience. In particular, it's pretty good at real multitasking with the aid of its various Q-Slide apps and dual window feature. On top of that, LG sprinkles in some additional benefits in the form of its smart notice tidbits, as well as some useful theming options that change up the look of the interface. Separated by almost 6 months with their releases, there's undoubtedly a degree of separation regarding their processing hardware. The older Nexus 6 is outfitted with a last generation quad-core 2.7 GHz Qualcomm Snapdragon 805 chipset, coupled with 3 GB of RAM and the Adreno 420 GPU. The G4, on the other hand, is greeted with a 64-bit base hexa-core 1.8 GHz Qualcomm Snapdragon 808 chip with 3 GB of RAM and the Adreno 418 GPU. Now, needless to say, one can presume that the G4 has the upper hand, but does it really? Based on our benchmark runs, the two handsets possess nearly the same processing punch, Whether they're basic or intensive processes, the outcomes can sway to either device actually. Now, benchmarks aside, when we use the two for day-to-day operations, we find the Nexus 6 exhibiting the smoother and snappier responses. Then again, LG's custom skin definitely adds some touches that require more processing power. The 13 megapixel camera of the Nexus 6 features an f2.0 aperture lens, you have optical image stabilization, a dual LED flash screen, you have a 2 megapixel front camera, and you have up to Ultra HD 4K video recording with it. Conversely, the G4 answers back with an equally impressive brand new 16 megapixel camera sensor with a wide f1.8 aperture lens on top of that sensor. You have improved optical image stabilization, the same liquidly split laser assisted autofocus from before, a new color spectrum sensor, and an 8 megapixel front facing camera with an f2.0 aperture lens. Now, the camera app on the Nexus 6 is Google's Camera, which is something that can be downloaded by any Android phone. Although it's sporting a cleaner interface sprinkled in with a few shooting modes, it can't match the styling of the G4's camera interface and its full-featured DSLR-like controls, like having histogram integrated into the interface and a manual mode that hardcore shutterbugs will appreciate, giving us control over the shutter speed as well. Okay, so we'll certainly agree that their outdoor shots fare well against one another, where they deliver plenty of details to allow for proper cropping. However, we find the G4 handling dynamic range a lot better than the Nexus 6, which tends to favor an overexposed composition at times. Now, turn down the lights, it paints an even more promising picture for the G4, as its shots are noticeably brighter, enabling details to become more visible. Not only that, but the G4's quality is less noisy and more sharpened in tone, where the Nexus 6, it's underexposed and grainy. Likewise, we prefer the G4's video recording quality as well, primarily because the Nexus 6 exhibits a softer tone with details, and it's rather slow with its focus. Comparatively, it's minutely better with the G4 because of its detail, stabilization, and moderate exposure adjustment. Our only complaint with the quality, in fact, is related to the thin and light audio recording. Google Play Music is preloaded with the two phones, but LG offers its own native player as an alternative, though it's pretty conventional. Thanks in part to it projecting audio towards us and producing a powerful audio output of 75 decibels, the Nexus 6's dual front-firing speakers delivers a commanding presence with its quality. Despite its higher reach of 79 decibels with its single rear speaker, the G4's quality sounds a bit flat unless an equalizer setting is enabled. Now, more than capable of playing all sorts of videos, the Nexus 6's larger screen size might prove to be more ideal, but the G4 undoubtedly has some slick qualities that make it, in some cases, the preferred handset. In addition to its vibrancy thanks to its IPS quantum display, the experience is further strengthened on the G4 by its multitasking component, where videos can be played on top of whatever we're doing. Between them, we'll go with the G4 when it comes to call quality, mainly because the overall result is nearly excellent in every category. Not only is its earpiece and speakerphone deafening tone, but voices are for the most part audible, despite its somewhat artificial sound. In contrast, the Nexus 6 has some noticeable static sounds in the background through the earpiece. Just by looking at them, it's clear that the Nexus 6 is sporting the higher capacity battery. It's actually a 3220 mAh one to be exact, while the G4 clocks in with a respectably sized 3000 mAh battery cell. Most likely due to that difference, it's how the Nexus 6 is able to perform longer in our battery benchmark tests, where it reaches a mark of 7 hours and 53 minutes, blowing away the G4's result of 6 hours and 6 minutes. Another thing to note too is that the Nexus 6 features built-in wireless charging, whereas with the G4, it's wired for it, but you need to purchase the optional rear casing to actually gain that feature. Crowning a champion is always a difficult thing to do. Factoring their pricing, the Nexus 6 can be picked up for as low as $600 outright, or $200 with a 2-year contract. That puts it in a better position than when it was initially released, making it pretty competitive to the G4's on-contract pricing of $200. Quite frankly, it's a toss-up and mainly hinges on what matters to you the most. The G4 impresses us with its sophisticated looks, brilliant-looking IPS quantum display, incredible camera, excellent call quality, and its powerful user experience. Conversely, the Nexus 6 can still outbox its newer rival, as it delivers a commanding presence with its sturdier construction, gigantic screen size, longer battery life, and stock Android experience. The latter, of course, might be a huge drawing factor for those who yearn for the latest and greatest in terms of Android.